Today we will discuss 3 spectacular solved cold cases in 2020. Karla Jan Walker. In 2020, one of Texas' oldest cold cases was successfully solved. Karla Jan Walker's horrific death remained unsolved for 46 years. February 16, 1974, began as a day of celebration and pleasure but quickly turned tragedy. Karla Walker, a popular 17-year-old cheerleader, was preparing for a Valentine's Day dance at her high school in Fort Worth. Her family was thrilled to send her depart with her lover, Rodney, who was known for her vivacious personality. Karla was a year younger than Rodney McCoy. As he was the football team's quarterback, they made an ideal high school couple. They seemed to have a good time at the school dance, where they hooked up with friends. Though the dance was overseen, the couple reportedly sneaked a few sips from a flask, and each smoked a little amount of marijuana. Though they were having a good time, the couple left the dance early to go eat with their friends at a neighborhood restaurant. Karla and Rodney ultimately left their pals in quest of some alone time and proceeded to a popular hangout for local teenagers, a bowling alley. However, instead of going inside, the two chose to sit in the rear of their car in the nearly empty parking lot. Before the couple began kissing, they spoke and laughed in the back seat, as teenagers do. Karla sat at an angle, with her back against the car door. Due to their focus on one another in the rear seat, they were unaware of an approaching stranger. People rarely locked their doors while inside their vehicle, and Rodney was no exception. Karla fell to the ground once the man opened the door behind her. Rodney attempted to grab Karla from where she had fallen, but the man pulled out a revolver and threatened to shoot him. Karla allegedly yelled, "I'll go with you, but don't shoot him." Rodney heard gunfire and panicked, believing he was being shot. The guy then pointed the gun at his face and pressed the trigger again, but nothing occurred. Rodney recognized the revolver wasn't loaded, but before he could think more, he was smacked in the head repeatedly, knocking him out. When she awoke, he was still in his truck, bleeding from a gash on his head, but Karla was gone. The last thing Rodney remembered was Karla shouting to him, "Go get my dad." Rodney hurried to Karla's house, covered in blood, to tell her parents what had occurred. The Walkers were horrified and phoned the police, while Karla's astonished father returned to the bowling alley. When police arrived, they discovered a .22 caliber Ruger handgun magazine. Police and volunteers searched for Karla Walker on foot, horseback, and by helicopter. Rodney had provided the cops an extremely detailed description of the stranger. He described the man as Caucasian, thin, clean-cut, with short wavy hair, and wearing a shining green sleeveless vest and a white cowboy hat. Rodney was also certain he'd heard the man talk with a Texas accent. Rodney had initially become a suspect, although this was due to a lack of other leads. Karla's body was discovered after 3 days of searching in a ditch near Lake Benbrook. Her autopsy revealed she died between 24 to 36 hours of being stolen. During her captivity, she was tortured and abused. It was also discovered that she had been injected with morphine. Her death was thought to be caused by strangulation. Following her discovery, the public provided authorities with numerous tips and potential suspects. The cops recorded over 200 calls with potentially useful information. The investigation appeared to be straightforward, with multiple suspects. Glenn Samuel McCurley, who lived less than a mile from the bowling alley, was off work from his truck driving job and lacked a witness due to his wife's absence the night Karla was abducted, piqued the police's interest. McCurley was linked to Karla's kidnapping after purchasing rounds for a rifle with the same magazine found in the parking lot. When police demanded to view his gun, he claimed it was stolen about the same time Karla was taken, but he never reported it due to a criminal record from a previous car theft. McCurley was plainly suspect, but the police had no definitive proof linking him to the crime, and so they had to let him go. The police investigated other suspects and some came forward to admit their involvement. However, all were eventually eliminated. For years, police examined Karla's case, and while they frequently had leads, none of them led to the discovery of her perpetrator. Investigators obtained DNA evidence from Carla's body and clothing, leading them to believe they would eventually solve the crime. The lack of precise DNA sequencing technologies in the 1970s was a challenge. In 2019, a letter about Carla's murder was uncovered and uploaded on social media, sparking renewed interest in her case. Carla's DNA from her bra was forwarded to Othram Incorporated after her case gained attention. Using cutting-edge technology that was not before available, Othram generated a complete DNA profile for a suspect. The profile was analyzed in CODIS combined DNA index system but yielded no results. Adding the DNA sequence to GED match narrowed down the search to 3 brothers with the last name McCurley. On July 7, 2020, investigators removed a bin from Glenn Samuel McCurley's house. The authorities quickly identified the principal suspect based on DNA matches with his brothers. Items from his trash were investigated, and his DNA was extracted. On September 4, 2020, it was discovered that McCurley's DNA matched Carla's bra. A few days later, the police approached McCurley and spoke with him and his wife. He gave them the same narrative he had given years before, that he had not killed anyone and had never met Carla Walker. McCurley even submitted a DNA sample and agreed to have it tested. McCurley's DNA samples matched those found on Carla, leading to his arrest. McCurley is charged with capital murder and is being jailed on $100,000 bond pending trial. The facts of McCurley's life across 4 decades are still being investigated. Carla's brother, Jim Walker, announced during a news conference that after 46 years, 5 months, and 3 days, they now have a name and are working towards a full resolution. Jim expresses his support for McCurley's family, but also seeks justice for his sister's death. However, Carla's situation changed dramatically when McCurley spoke from prison. McCurley now claims he saved Carla after previously denying any involvement in her death. In an interview, McCurley revealed that he had been drinking extensively the night he stumbled upon Carla and her partner in the bowling alley's parking lot. McCurley claimed he was hitting on her while I was drinking beer in the parking lot. And I saw him, he screamed. And I went over there, opened the door, and pushed him off of her. He claimed to have pulled Carla to his car and talked with her until she calmed down, and she reportedly thanked him for getting her boyfriend off of her. McCurley explained, "She just hugged me, I kissed her. I mistaken her for something other. I did not mean to do it." Many people are skeptical of his testimony regarding Carla's murder, as he failed to provide further details. More information is likely to be disclosed once a trial date is chosen for 2021. Fawn Cox. Solving a homicide can result in both a resolution and a reckoning. It's the first murder case solved by the Kansas City Police Department using advanced genetic genealogy techniques like those used in the Golden State Killer case. Sometimes the long-awaited solutions come as a surprise. This was true for the family of Fawn Cox. In a quiet residential neighborhood, tragedy struck one fateful night, shattering the peace and innocence that once prevailed. The year was 1989, and a tight-knit family was left in shock when their 16-year-old daughter was found dead in her own room. What followed was a gripping and convoluted tale of investigation, false leads, and eventual revelation, a story that took an astonishing 31 years to fully uncover. Fawn Cox, born on March 24, 1973, in Kansas City, Missouri, lived an ordinary life. The Cox family resided in a small 2-story house, struggling to make ends meet in a rough neighborhood. Fawn, the eldest of 3 sisters, shouldered responsibilities beyond her years, assisting her parents in caring for her younger siblings. A devoted churchgoer and an avid swimmer, Fawn's life was punctuated by the ordinary rhythms of adolescence. At the age of 16, Fawn's life took a pivotal turn when she secured a part-time job at a local amusement park. Determined to contribute to her family's meager income, she spent her summer vacations working at the amusement park, selling tickets and braving the scorching heat behind a cash register. Her days were filled with responsibilities. On July 26, 1989, 16-year-old Fawn Cox returned home late from Worlds of Fun in Kansas City. She worked until 11 p.m. and often went straight to bed to prepare for the next day's work, leaving her family without communication. Fawn was a typical girl who attended church and avoided trouble. Felisa, Fawn's younger sister, noticed her alarm going off in her room the next morning, but she did not respond. Felisa went in to wake up her sister, but instead discovered her dead. She had been gone for a while before discovering her. Beverly, Fawn's mother, entered the room, assuming she was still sleeping. Someone entered Fawn's room through the window at night. She was assaulted, strangled, and left in her bedroom for her family to discover. Her family reported no startling sounds that night, indicating a potential problem. However, the house's noisy air conditioners likely obscured any sounds. The dog's barking that night, which sounded anxious, was attributed to its pregnancy. The attacker chose Fawn's window and remained undiscovered, indicating a targeted attack. Investigators believe the killer knew Fawn. Despite collecting DNA evidence from the site, they lacked the necessary equipment to identify the killer. Initially, 3 teens were accused with her killing, but there was insufficient evidence to condemn them due to their inability to be identified at the scene. After an 8-month jail sentence for one of the kids, the case was eventually dismissed and the 3 teens were released. Crime Stoppers ultimately joined the hunt for Fawn's killer. Despite a billboard featuring Fawn's face and a $10,000 prize for leads leading to an arrest, no arrests were made. As Fawn's case grew cold, several police officers became concerned. Despite expectations that the killer of Fawn would strike again, no one has been apprehended. Sergeant Benjamin Caldwell has stated that the perpetrator of the unsolved case has either not been charged with a felony or is deceased. People do not start killing and then stop, as if they disappeared from the world. However, this is what appears to have happened. For 31 years, Fawn's killer remained unidentified. However, her family never gave up, as Fawn's death tormented them for decades. They were determined to find her killer one day. Over the years, they organized fundraisers to promote Fawn's case and obtain advanced DNA testing to identify her perpetrator. The investigation was resolved in 2020 through collaboration between Kansas City Police and the FBI. The police department could not afford to do modern DNA testing. Although Fawn's family volunteered to pay, the FBI covered the cost of the analysis. After only a few weeks, her family received surprising answers that left them shaken. Fawn's cousin, Donald Cox Jr., was identified as her attacker and killer through tests. Cox died of an overdose in 2006. The police initially declined to publicize Cox's name since he was deceased and could not be charged. However, Fawn's family informed the public. Having previously discussed the issue publicly, they felt it was inappropriate to withhold the finding due to its distressing nature. Uncovering the truth adds to Fawn's family's difficulty in finding closure, despite their frank discussion about the sorrow of not having answers. Fawn's sister Felisa stated, "It's a relief to have closure. The answers may not always meet our expectations, but they provide closure." Christina Jessop. One of Canada's most infamous and perplexing cold cases was eventually solved in 2020. Christine Jessop's tragedy shook the country, leaving many parents distraught and horrified when the 9-year-old's fate became public. Today, however, the iconic case has reached a conclusion, but it leaves many believing that true justice will never be given. Christine Jessop was kidnapped on October 3, 1984, from her home in Queensville near Toronto. Christine's mother and older brother Kenny left her at home while they visited her father, Bob, who was in custody at a detention center. Christine's mother believes she was too young to witness her father's detention and interact with other detainees. She was just 9 years old. They came home later that day, only to discover that Christine had gone away. When she couldn't be found, her mother called the police, claiming that her daughter had been kidnapped. After the abduction was reported to authorities, the community banded together to locate the missing child. Unfortunately, no sign of her could be found for months, but her family refused to give up hope. Unfortunately, there would be no happy ending. Her body was discovered on New Year's Eve, 3 months after she went missing, 31 miles from her home. She'd been assaulted and stabbed. Initially, there were no leads in finding Christine's murderer. However, it was less than a year after Christine's death when the authorities made a significant breakthrough in the case. In April of 1985, Guy Paul Morin was arrested and charged with her murder. Morin, her next-door neighbor, became a suspect during the investigation due of his near proximity. Though the public was initially relieved to have someone they considered as a hideous killer behind bars, Morin's trial did not go as predicted. First, there was a mistrial which then led in an appeal that stretched over multiple years. Morin was charged with first-degree murder in 1992, 7 years after his initial conviction. He was condemned to life in jail, but the story of Christine's death did not conclude there. And though no one realized it at the time, the case's problems were only beginning. After Morin had served 18 months in prison, evidence from Christine's remains was analyzed, and it was suddenly discovered that Morin could not have been her killer. After the false conviction, he was formally declared innocent and released from prison. Following Morin's release, an investigation began to determine how an innocent man was convicted of a crime he did not commit. The investigation revealed that the police had bungled the case in their desire to discover and arrest the perpetrator of the atrocity that had captured the nation's attention, culminating in Morin receiving $1.25 million for his erroneous conviction. The probe also resulted in numerous changes to how Canadian police officers handled murder investigations. Following Morin's acquittal, a task force conducted interviews with over 300 males, collecting and matching DNA to a sample found in Christine's underwear. The task force originally appeared promising, but the investigation quickly went cold. Police ran short of suspects, therefore the task force was disbanded in 1998. Christine's relatives feared they would never find out who killed her. In October 2020, a genetic genealogy website revealed a suspect's identity. Police submitted the graded semen stains to Othram Incorporated, an American lab, to validate the suspect's DNA and construct a complete profile. The lab used GEDmatch and family tree DNA to create a family tree and compare the DNA to a sample obtained from the Center for Forensic Science. After 6 months of inquiry, they identified and named a suspect 36 years after Christine's death. Calvin Hoover has been listed as the primary suspect. During the original investigations, Hoover was not considered a suspect. Christine's parents were relieved to learn this update, as they had feared they would not live to see the day their daughter's killer was arrested. Hoover was 28 when Christine died. Christine's brother Kenny disclosed that Heather, Hoover's wife at the time, had worked with their father Bob and was a friend of their mother's prior to Christine's death. Kenny also stated that Hoover was considered a family friend and had even paid them a visit at their house. Even more surprising, Kenny recalled Hoover being present for the numerous searches for Christine throughout the first 2 months after she vanished, as well as attending her funeral and coming to their house for the wake afterward. Morin, the guy falsely accused of the crime, stated that he was informed of the developments in the case by police officers who visited his home. He expressed satisfaction that the Jessops can now have peace of mind. "It's something I've always expected." Morin's family expressed relief that he had been entirely exonerated by science. Despite being cleared, he remained under suspicion for decades until the true killer was identified. Despite a breakthrough in one of Canada's most renowned cold cases, few are rejoicing. Hoover died in 2015. If he had been alive when the investigation began, he would have been detained and questioned. However, due to his death, the investigation is facing significant challenges. Hoover is currently referred to as the prime suspect and presumed killer because he cannot be charged posthumously. Though the public has denounced Hoover as Christine's killer, the police investigation is still ongoing, and they are working to create a timeline of Hoover's whereabouts based on Christine's death. Despite the fact that the case is getting closer to being resolved, many questions remain unanswered. Detective Steve Smith of the Homicide Cold Case Squad stated that the inquiry has now really moved into high gear. Police are now looking into the facts of Hoover's life over the last 3 decades, specifically seeking to discover any other prospective victims, since they are not ruling out the possibility that he was involved in other crimes. The probe also found that they had received a torrent of tips. Hoover's family, including his ex-wife Heather and their sons, have been as cooperative as possible with the authorities. Despite their own shock and devastation at the news, they have assisted the police with everything they have requested. Christine's father, Bob Jessop, reportedly stated that he does not recall Hoover's involvement in their life and believes he had a motive for doing so. I'm not sure what it would have been. I honestly don't know. The case may provide some peace for Christine's family by identifying her killer. However, justice may not be fully served if Hoover is not held accountable for his actions.